Nocturama was, I think, more varied in tone than the previous two albums.
Yeah, the thing with Nocturama is that it was all made in. It was basically recorded in 4 days, which is incredibly quick.
It's wonderful because it one song segues into the other, and it's such a kind of mosaic of styles and things like that.
Nick had written these songs, and had all his sheets of lyrics, as he often that's what usually happens is he comes in, says hello to everyone, and he pretty much goes straight for the piano. Certainly back then it was always straight to the piano. He'd sit down, have his lyrics, and he'd just start playing. I mean, this would happen within 20 minutes or 15 minutes of him arriving in the building.
It was a particularly, I guess, memorable time in that, my wife was several months pregnant. We went along to that session.
And I remember Nick came out after they were recording Wonderful Life, and Nick came out and said, "Troots, what do you think of that song?" And I said, well, and that was the first time that I had my hand on my stomach. I must have been about 4 or 5 months pregnant. It was the first time that I felt Lauren kick. And I said to him, well, I think it was great. And I think the baby does too, because she's just,
And, Nick kind of looked surprised and said, or hated it, which I thought was a very Nick thing to do. So Wonderful Life is, not only was it a kind of a special moment in my life, but also, it's obviously interesting lyrically.
It's such a cliche to say it's a wonderful life, baby. But there's something about the downbeat way in which he says it.
The thing about Nick is that he is, quite a sort of complex, interesting, but actually strangely basic kind of person.
When somebody starts talking about themselves as the idiot boy in the corner, you've got a trustworthy narrator. There's something about the point of departure, the perspective that Nick chooses to tell his stories from that actually hits the emotional nail on the head and takes you with him.
And he's very visual too, and also the imagery that's in the songs is very visual. But I just see them, most of them, are sort of, are sort of him working things out.
One of the interesting developments that is manifest in one of Wonderful Life is the use of the first person plural, we.
Bob Dylan does that a lot, where he'll change the subject from I to me to you to and who is I in the song, who is me, who is you in the song.
It's constructed so that it's talking between a man and a woman, a couple implicitly, but the use of we does, especially when you're talking about life in general, does make it a very accessible song.
But it's obvious to me that he spends a lot of time on the songs. And I think he's, although Dylan claims that, he's more in the intuitive, write a song in the back of a taxi cab school, whereas a guy like Leonard Cohen, I once sat with Leonard and we were talking about Hallelujah, and he starts taking out book after book after book, scribbling with different verses of Hallelujah. And I think it took him 10 years to write Hallelujah.
You have to be somewhat obsessed, compelled to continue creating and writing songs, writing text the way he does for that long a period of time.
I think Nick is probably somewhere in the middle of Bob and Leonard on that, but it's obvious that he's a great craftsman.
I think he just keeps challenging himself, or the band seems to keep challenging themselves. They're not afraid to work, which in the era of 3 or 4 years in between records for a lot of bands that don't seem to get the memo of striking while the iron's hot, that these guys are so prolific.
To maintain the level of writing that he has it's an amazing feat, and it's one that I don't really think many of his contemporaries have come anywhere near matching.
They don't seem to be cursed with the syndrome of putting out everything that gets laid down in the studio. I mean, I could be completely wrong, but I mean, the records are these well-crafted stories. I mean, they're documents of that time in the musician's life as well as our own, I believe.
The perception that people have of Nick Cave, it is definitely how he is, but it's a very small part of how he is. And the sense of humour he has, the wit, obviously, that comes over in his lyrics, but he is just like that all the time. He's very, very funny.
There are musical jokes, there are lyrical scenarios, there are things that, you know, where Nick and Nick's approach to life, his intellect, you know, it probably takes a while for people to actually realise that it's not all that serious.
He Wants You, I think, is a great example of Nick's kind of very sardonic humor.
I just think it's an extraordinary song because it could be about lots. It could be about lots of things.
On the face of it, this looks like just like, you know, oh, it's a lovely love song. In fact, you know, if most people's readings of it is, you know, oh man, this is so romantic. He's in a boat and he's going through the weather and he wants you.
The whole idea of walking towards someone to give yourself to them over totally.
It starts off with this heroic image. You know, in his boat and through the dark he rode, chained to the oar, and the night and the wind that blowed horribly around his ears. Under the bridge and into your dreams he soars, while you lie alone in that idea-free sleep of yours. So right away there's, well, wait a minute. He's basically saying that she's a fucking idiot. I mean, you know, she's laying there with no fucking ideas, even while she's sleeping, that you've been sleeping now for years.
I often think he doesn't really write many personal songs. A lot of it's, you know, he's talking about an idea or seeing women in different guises that aren't necessarily the way he sees them.
And then the chorus comes and it's majestic. And he wants you. He wants you. He is straight and he is true. Ooh. So, okay, somebody's validating this guy.
I just think he's a great observer of human nature.
And you will wake and walk and draw the blind and feel some presence there behind and turn to see what that may be. Well, the image I get from that is Dracula. I mean, it's that image of the woman awakes from sleep and there's something behind the curtain and the wind's rustling. And that's the scene in all the Dracula films.
Nick Cave always finds new ways to tell what seems to be a very old story.
To me, it's just such a rich example of Nick's brilliance in writing lyrics and conveying a mood. And then, you know, having this kind of ironic distance from the whole enterprise.
When you have such a deep yearning to keep expressing, and therefore you also feed and nourish yourself on so much around you and so much work that you've already done, and also what can just add to your palette of ideas to keep expressing and keep changing, because to keep yourself interested in what you do is actually the prime thing for many performers, many artists.
Working with the Bad Seeds is like, it is completely different to working on any other band that's ever existed, you know, dead or alive. This band is unbelievable. It's incredibly intense.
Certainly, you know, having been involved in it, it feels like there's a real genuine desire to push the envelopes once more again somewhere else.
Walking into the studio to work with them was a bit like walking into, you know, some kind of beehive where everybody's attacking you with different thoughts, but no one's saying anything quite directly. It's all sort of trying to, you know, I found myself just trying to talk to them all individually to work out what the hell we were doing.
Nick in particular incredibly kind of restless and incredibly, you know, he throws himself into whatever he's doing, like you know, mind, body, and soul. Everything goes into it.
You've got you know, amazing characters in the band, but you've also got, at the time of doing Nocturama, you had three of them, the most strongly focused, strongly willed people, all in one band, and not necessarily all agreeing.
It's almost like that typical thing of the, you know, 1% inspiration argument. And actually that's kind of true, because you get your inspiration, you have a little moment where you just have the idea, and if it's a good idea, then everything else is just building on top of that basic building block.
And I think, you know, the majority of Nocturama, it is literally first or second take of those songs. I mean, as soon as they could play it from beginning to end, that was the take.
A lot of people struggle with their work and keep switching it around and rewriting it as they're going. We don't really do that.
The idea with that album was to do 2 or 3 or 4 days of recording with these songs, have a break for about a month while they went on tour around Australia. And I actually went back to America because I'd been working on another album, so I had to return to that. And the idea was to then come back again a month later, listen to what we've done and work out what kind of album it could be and what needed to be done, what was crap, what was really good.
Quite often it's only in the listening back that it starts to make some kind of sense. At least that's how I find it. And you can sometimes only hear those moments later on, and at the time you might be just like, you know, hoping to hang in there.
So when we all came back a month later, I remember us all sitting in the control room going, well, it sounds amazing. It's really good. And I was very shy of saying that because I didn't know them that well. I mean, I you know, I hadn't had enough time, you know, with them to talk about this stuff. So I was coming back, I went away and had my own experience in LA, and they'd toured the whole of Australia. And suddenly it was like, you know, Mick was saying, you know, I think these recordings are really good. It sounds good, and there's an incredible feeling there.
90% of the stuff that we do, we manage to get in that phase of the recording. Some of them we go back to if we're not happy with the way they are, but that's just essentially becoming engaged with the song and what the music is and getting it happening in a particular way and getting a kind of groove or a vibe happening with the music and making it work.
Bring It On was one of the ones we revisited.
Chris Bailey was invited to come along and sing on Bring It On. And Nick had explained to me that he was somewhat apprehensive about asking Chris Bailey to sing like he'd sung in The Saints. As he pointed out to me, if anyone asked him to sing like he did in the birthday party, he'd tell him to fuck off.
I just remember he went out there and sang, you know, with Nick. They both did it. They did it live together. And Nick kept wanting him to do all those screams that he does, you know, that he's famous for. And he's like, do it again, more of the scream. Can we put more screaming in, you know?
And at one point, Blixer starts giving Chris advice about how he might be able to actually scream, you know, whether he's going to use the back of the throat or whatever. And Chris Bailey, in his very dry way, sort of looked at Blixer through the studio glass and said, are you some sort of expert on screaming? And Nick's like in the background, I could see him like he was really tense about this exchange. And he then interrupted and didn't allow Blixer to actually answer that question.
I think Chris was very amused by the whole situation. I think he couldn't quite believe that Nick wanted him to be on the record and that he was actually there and actually doing it. And he was so charming.
Chris has been a friend of mine for many years.
The Saints were, you know, one of the great bands that also, like the birthday party, had, you know, gone abroad.
Obviously, they released Bring It On, and it was a hit. And he was on tour with the Bad Seeds in the United States while I was living there, and we caught up. I went to the show.
It was this thing of seeing it from the very beginning, where it was just a sort of a concept, and seeing Chris Bailey come into the studio and actually recording it, and then seeing it being done on stage. It was just like the entire thing from where to go. And
he's having a ball on this tour, and I also got the impression that the various members of the Bad Seeds were tutoring him on how to be a good bad seed.
I spent many years, dancing around the living room to that song and, going to see him play live and, waiting for that song to come on. And
when they performed Bring It On in New York City, as an Australian being in the audience, it was just incredible to see two Australian artists of their calibre sending them crazy.
Nick asked John Hillcoat, what sort of videos are people watching at the moment? And John said, well, basically they mainly consist of girls shaking their asses to camera. And Nick said, that sounds like the sort of video for this song.
Well, we kept talking about dance, and performance and where we can take it, and got on to the dancehall Jamaican style dancing, ragga.
I mean, people saw that video and thought it was the most distasteful thing they'd ever seen.
We just thought it would be a great to take a different genre, which Nick does a lot, mixing genres and bizarre juxtapositions.
But it's great. And actually, again, very funny. And it's only really what we see in a lot of American videos anyway.
They were fighting to get on camera as well, a lot of these girls, asking the first AD to, because he was helping put people in position, so he was being propositioned many times for various girls to get into shot. But it was just a perverse thing, and we just decided to push it to its limits into surreal humor, hopefully.
At the time Nocturama came out, I was working on this movie where I had to keep going over to Staten Island, and there was nothing else to do, especially on the Staten Island Fair. There was nothing, or mostly in Staten Island, there was nothing else to do but listen to music. So I actually took to wearing an iPod, and Nocturama holds a specific place in my heart because of that. It just is one of those that I sort of, whether it's great or not, I indoctrinated myself to the point where I am familiar enough with that album that it means a lot to me.
And it's the last record Blixer played on. So that was then sad to say and finished. After this one, he went out of the band before the tour. Then, sad.
Very sweet man, Blixer. I remember withering under the onslaught one day, and he just leaned across to me and said, just lean forward, Conway, it'll be all right.
I'd never met Blixer before. However, I had been told leading up to this recording that, certain people had said, you're going to be working with Blixer. And I kept on saying, what does that mean? And they said, you'll find out.
Whatever he did was never exact. It was unconventional, and it was the way you would hear smoothness in the music, but there would just still be this element of dissonance, of things not quite right, and it was usually down to him.
I think at that point I had my repertoire of how I could experiment with strings strung to a guitar-like object.
He asked me to set up this quite a complicated sound for him, and he went into incredible detail about how this sound was made. It was a sort of guitar through various delays and harmonizers and stuff. And he described it all to me, and it made some sense. And he said, I want you to do this. I want you to plug this into this, and this into this, and this goes on the left speaker, this goes on the right, and so on. And then he said something which, he said, it's like this sound that is on this Public Image record, which you will not have heard. And I thought, that's very odd, because it was the only record I made with Public Image. And so I thought, he doesn't, so he doesn't know that I did that record, and I know exactly the sound he's talking about, so I'll do it and I'll get it, but I won't get it the way he told me, because he was nearly right, but there's another way. So I did it my way. And he came in and said, yes, this sound is perfect. This is exactly the sound. It's very good. Well done. And he patted me on the shoulder, like, well done. You've done a good job. I really like this result. And then he said, you used these delays like I told you. And I said, well, actually, no, I didn't. I used these delays over here. And he said, yes, but how can you do this? It should be, I told you, like he was like a school teacher. I told you to use this. And I said, well, you said the Public Image song, and I know that sound because I made that record. And he was like, no, this is impossible. There's no way you can have made this record, and absolutely refused to believe it. But then the next day he came in and obviously had looked it up, and he was really great. And he's been really great ever since.
For me, I mean, I come from that kind of era now where you kind of listen to songs, you don't necessarily listen to them as an album.
Nocturama as an album didn't really work for me. In fact, to this day, the only song that I listen to off that album is Dead Man in My Bed. But with that said, it's probably in the top 2 or 3 songs that I would choose. If someone said, what is your favourite Bad Seed song of all time, I would say Dead Man in My Bed.
It's the fact that it's, such a kind of manic song, and just like it starts with such a like kind of big opener, and the I find the lyrics really amusing in that kind of dark way.
Nocturama really worked for me. I mean, there's a Dead Man in My Bed.
It was a fantastic return to form song. I hadn't heard that constant drive and that constant catharsis in Nick Cave's music since much earlier albums.
There's a couple of good songs on Nocturama. I mean, Still in Love, I really like. I think that's a great song.
It starts with the cops are hanging around the house. The cars outside look like they got the blues. It's just what a wonderful opening 2 lines of a song.
In some ways, that maybe harks back to the Murder Ballads record, although I seem to remember it's not sure if someone has actually been murdered in that song or not.
Nick's songs are almost like soundtracks for movies that should get made. Still in Love is just such a great kind of, noir setting. I mean, the cops are hanging around the house. There's just great little touches here where somebody points at this and somebody, so you're in the middle of a crime scene. Somebody points at this, somebody points at that. Everybody's creeping around with plastic covers on their shoes. And of course it's a relationship that's been murdered.
There's a real, he's always looking for some different take from the one before. But how you achieve that without it appearing willful is another thing, because you can go out and make a hip hop album and sound totally unconvincing.
Nocturama was the first record to be produced to a sort of deadline. I want to produce X amount of records within this amount of time.
They seem totally comfortable with it. No longer has the feeling that at any point the wheels could come off it, which there was something appealing about that. And yet by the same token, it doesn't feel in any way contrived.
To be able to sustain that level of output over that time, it's quite extraordinary. So I would say that Nocturama is the only one that doesn't quite, I rarely find myself wanting to put that on.
Well, we kind of like that one because it is so neglected. We kind of favor that one. We love all our children, but the ugly ones even more so.
I mean, it's a weird album, Nocturama. I mean, it's got a strange cover.
It's such has such a stillness and like a peaceful quality to it, but it feels like it's like that quiet moment right before the bomb drops. When all the birds know, so they stop singing. That's what that cover seems to me.
It was the next album after No More Shall We Part, which everybody, made such a fuss about, that it was almost inevitable that the next one was going to kind of not somehow seem as magnificent.
I'm not very fond of Rock of Gibraltar.
I think Nick took great pleasure in that song.
That's not a very original choice of a song not to be very fond of. I think it's Nick's most maligned child. He's very fond of it.
Someone came up to him and said that he knew and said it was the worst song that he'd ever written, and Nick really got off on that, and I think it was then included as often as possible.
Last time I saw him was at the ATP festival where the Dirty Three had curated it.
The songs really came to life in live performance, live renditions of the songs.
My friend, who has always maintained that the Nocturama is a great album, came running over to me and said, you've got to come. Nick Cave's doing Rock of Gibraltar and it's brilliant. And I really don't like Rock of Gibraltar, and I couldn't imagine that it was brilliant. And then I went there and saw him playing the guitar and doing the song, and it was just the best version of Rock of Gibraltar. I mean, he totally transformed it and made it really, really fantastic.
Didn't Nick get the key to Gibraltar or something he had to accept?
Well, I know he got a bum rap for rhyming Malta and Gibraltar. I think the internet chat rooms went crazy.
It has that ability to, I guess, lift you out of the mundaneness of the day-to-day to a different place.
After college, I moved from Colorado to New York City, and the first job that I got here was working on the sales floor of the Virgin Megastore in Times Square.
I was in the break room. I worked in the classical department, and he walked in and he basically swept me off my feet with the most dorkiest pickup line ever. He asked me if I was a writer.
I saw her in there, and she was writing in a book, and obviously I thought she was attractive, and I walked up to her and I asked her, "Are you a writer?" And she said, "Yeah."
And one of the first conversations we had was about how Nick Cave was playing, how they were playing in, I guess it was June
24th. And I asked her, "Hey, do you want to go to the show? Let's go together."
The thing that I remember most, which we kind of call our song, is Babe, I'm on Fire.
The way he led the band was just, so charismatic. And we were pretty much hypnotized in a way.
And I guess at the point where we were both so shy about our relationship and where it wasn't even a relationship yet, and just the words of like everybody being on fire, and I think it was at the point where he said like the killer bee or something, where we kind of just like gravitated towards each other.
It must have been probably at about the 7-minute mark, because it's a long song. I think I reached over and I just grabbed her hand and we held it tight, and we were both just in this kind of entranced, hypnotized state.
It was really like when you're standing next to someone and you feel that like magnetic pull, which I really think that song does, because how can you not feel something when you hear that song? I mean, it's 30 verses long or something like that.
If it isn't the longest song ever written, it's got to be in the top 3 or 4.
I mean, how many minutes is that? 15 minutes or something? The song goes on for 15 minutes.
The vocal performance on that is absolutely mind blowing. I'm still not sure how he did it, but I've seen him do it in person, so I know it's for real.
That's just an amazing track. It really is. Just that it will make you break a sweat just for what they went through to make that track.
No one had heard the song. No one had any idea how long it was.
Bought a lot of Nick Cave albums in my time. Only one of them on vinyl, though, which is Nocturama, because it comes on 2 pieces of vinyl, the first of which is the complete album, except Babe, I'm on Fire, and the second piece of vinyl is just Babe, I'm on Fire, on one disc like you bought it on 12-inch, as it would never be made available.
We did that whole album onto analog tape. The one reel of analog is 16 minutes long.
And there's just such a joy to, oh God, I sound like my dad, but such a joy to putting the needle down and watching it track right all the way through.
So he'd say, this is a loud, furious, loud song. Make it loud, Lorne. And then he'd just start with the piano, ding, 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 ding. And everybody would join in with the ding, 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 ding. And the bass would be going, and you just hear this racket, and it would go for a while. Then suddenly he'd start singing his his lyrics, or shouting his lyrics, and I'd be getting all the levels and all this stuff, and then he'd stop.
I guess everyone tries to get down a similar path as quick as we can.
Then we'd start again. They'd start again, and I was like, is the tape rolling? And this we had this assistant called Double D. His name's Dave Davis, and he's about 7 foot tall, lanky guy, quite a character. And Dave would run into the other room to look at the tape machine, make sure it's in record, came back and said, yep, it's rolling.
Nick likes to work really fast. He's a very impatient man in the studio.
8 minutes later, we're like, this keeps going. And I'm like, how long is this song? And all these different characters are coming in where I'm like, wow, this is, incredible track. And I'm like, Dave, go and check there's enough tape. And he comes back and he says, there's only a minute left. And I'm like just praying that this song doesn't go over, because we've already had 3 minutes for our first tape. So we've got, then there was like a false start. And I'm like thinking there's probably about 10 minutes of tape.
He doesn't like to twiddle with things and finesse things and, spend a lot of time on production.
So Dave's running backwards and forwards to see if there's enough tape. And I said, well, they're going to keep going. And we've got like 30 seconds left before the tape runs out. So he does his best to get another tape ready on the other tape machine, tries to plug it in. And I mean, the band are completely unaware that this was going on, by the way. Plugging it in so that both tape machines could possibly overlap. And then suddenly, the tape runs out. Like, it's just impossible to get everything plugged up in enough time for this second machine. So he quickly puts on the reel he's got, puts it on the tape machine, pushes record. So we missed, probably about, I don't know, not long, maybe 15 seconds, maybe one verse, I suppose, perhaps.
I mean, the amount of times, that I've heard, the first or second pass of, say, a vocal or of a track done. And no matter how many times you try and replay it, even with trying to fix up the problems that you heard in the first one, you just lose something each time you try and redo it.
Nick gets up, throws his headphones on the floor and goes, all right, let's have a listen.
He likes it to sound good, pretty much immediately on playback.
So someone said, did you get that? And I go, well, got most of it, and then it was like this really sort of like, what do you mean? You didn't? And I said, no, seriously, we got all of it. There's just the tape run out. And Nick's like, well, why? Why did the tape run out? And I said, well, a tape is only so long, and this song is longer than the tape. And, I had to do this whole explanation of why. And I said, look, next time a song is 16 minutes long, just tell me.
You come to the end of that and you just think, God, that was brilliant. That is great. Extreme. It's all the things I like. Extreme, long, original, out there, funny, dark.
Some of the lyrics and characters, they're just so ridiculous. That idea that not everything you have to do has to be taken so seriously. You can have humor in what you do. You can make yourself look ridiculous. It doesn't matter as long as you're having a good time.
The song lyrically was just so full of stereotypes and types. Every type, it's just littered with types and stereotypes. So we thought, well, fuck it, let's try and highlight the absurdity and the surrealism of stereotypes.
It's still probably not one of my favourite songs, but the video I love.
It's just, as cliched and corny as this sounds, it's just full of life and energy, and it's enjoyable to watch.
The video shows that Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds have got a sense of humour and a very lazy criticism of an awful lot of records that are thoughtful and fairly deep. In their own way, is that they make you feel suicidal, and that's the thing that people have said about the Smiths and Radiohead, and people say it about Muse. It's a really lazy criticism. Some people say it about Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds when I've got it. Oh God, I'm going to slash my wrist. Well, you don't understand. Firstly, you're not getting the record right, and secondly, watch that video. Watch that video. They're having fun.
It was probably the most fun we've ever had on a video because, everyone just laughed themselves silly.
And there are all these costume changes. And again, it's really done in a really crude, kind of almost naive way.
We had the band, just getting the cheap joke dress-up costume stuff to play each of these characters.
So there was quickly in and out, change, out, in. Was funny.
Yeah, it's such a contrast to some of Nick Cave's sort of more serious stuff, but it's still a masterpiece to me. I still think it's brilliant.
And they're all partaking, and they're all, again, making complete fools of themselves. Not again, but, making fools of themselves.
But some had problems with certain characters. But Jim, whenever we had a problem, Jim was the man. We just turned to Jim. And Warren was pretty much up for anything.
They've got no constraints. And, it's also that there's no embarrassment about anything.
I mean, that had an even worse reaction than Bring It On. Those two videos kind of put me out of work for a while. People were, really quite offended. But it's great to even think that you're able to do that with music video.
Last time I saw Nick, I had been listening to Nocturama a lot in my car driving around. And I said to him, man, that album is so underrated. I mean, it's such a great album. And Warren said, yeah, Nick, it's a great album. We did a good job.
Boatman's Call and No More Shall We Part are both such big personal works in a way that it almost needed a transitional album that was able to kind of dispense with that period of Nick's writing.
To me, those three albums are almost of a piece, and they're just filled with the most beautiful, beautiful songs of loss and regret.
They interrelate those albums as much as, Nocturama's derided and condescended about, it's that's kind of a little signing off of that period in a way.
Also Nocturama is the last sound actually from the old Bad Seed sound from Evereco before.
I mean, when you make your intentions known about how you feel about your own work too, inadvertently. It kind of comes through on the recording and the way you present it and all these sorts of aspects. People get they can see what's going on with the artist. And Nocturama was done very much as a light work that Nick just wanted to record a few songs and bung it out. And basically, in the end, it came across that way to the public too, that's kind of what we were doing. And he wanted to make an album that wasn't analysed, and it was this huge work that was, everybody took so fucking seriously. And,
we all perhaps have feelings about that Nocturama was kind of, this sort of stepping stone towards something better.
And then I think Nick was able to move on to something else. He was able to start writing some different things again.
I go where no man before me bothered to go, till the soles of my shoes are shot full of holes, and it's all downhill with a bullet. It's rambling and roving, it's taking its course. I'm I'm grazing with the dinosaurs and the dear old horses, and the city streets crack and a great hole forces me down. My soapbox, my pulpit, the theater ceiling, the silver star spangled, and the coins in my pocket go jingle.